Welcome inside Black and Gold. It's the start of a new year. Well, almost the start of a new league year. We are in the legal tampering period of free agency right now in the NFL. We got some news about some restructured contracts with the Saints. Still dealing with the angry Michael Thomas in the social media sphere. And we'll get into our conversation with Scott Shanle in this episode as well. He dropped by and we got to talk with him about all things Black and Gold, of course. Jeff, how are you doing, man, knowing that the free agency period is upon us?
I'm doing good. We just had a long conversation about Dune, so I got my sci-fi nerd out. So, yeah, and I do apologize last week. So a lot of people, if you've listened to this podcast, I had jury duty. I actually ended up on a jury, and I kept saying, oh, we'll record tomorrow night. Let's record tomorrow night. And then I would get home after a day of being on a jury and be mentally I can't do it. I can't do it. We're just gonna have to push to next week. And so that's what it ended up being. And I was an alternate too. So I had to sit through all of that, and then I couldn't even have my say in what happened. Anyway, so that's annoying.
And the worst part is you texted me at one point, you're like, I got my phone back, because obviously you can't be just sitting around on your cell phone.
No, well, they take it away. They take it away and they hide it in the judge's office, and they give it back to you for a lunch for 20 minutes. And then anyway, so I was a little slow on the uptake for a lot of these things. One thing that happened while I was in jury duty is Mike Thomas went off the handle of Jeff Duncan. So we'll talk about that. I want to push a lot of the free agency talk in this episode to the end. So we're going to spend the third segment talking about the latest that has happened, any updates on some of these visits or whatever. And I figure if the longer we hold it out, maybe there's some additional stuff that comes out that we can get in here. We're recording at about noon on Monday, which is not ideal, but I do want to get one episode out early in the week so that we can come and follow up on some stuff. So we'll talk a good bit about free agency in the back end. We have that interview with Scott Shanle, which, we talked a lot about guys like Demario, Tyrann, Mathieu, Jordan Howden. So I thought his insight was pretty good into a lot of that stuff. So we'll have that. In this first segment, I want to get into some extensions, some that we probably should have seen coming, some that I predicted last week that were going to happen, and so I'm glad that it did, because it got kind of weird in the interim with some weird, erroneous reporting or whatever. We'll get into that, but first, one thing that happened while I was on the jury is Michael Thomas went apeshit,
nuclear, yes,
on Jeff Duncan after Jeff posted an article saying that the Saints were going to move on from Mike Thomas. And there was a lot to it. There was a lot that happened. And I did find it interesting. Whenever Mike goes off the handle, I try to figure out, well, why is he so mad? What actually set him off? Because there's usually kind of a kernel of this is what started all of this. And once you get Mike going, it's got a lot to say. And in this case, I think the issue wasn't so much what was being reported. I think that's just kind of an ongoing thing. Mike does not like Jeff. I think the issue with Mike was that he was annoyed that it was framed that the Saints were moving on from Mike Thomas. And this was a decision in free agency that they were like, nah, we're done.
Right.
And I think in Mike's mind, it's this is just as much my decision as it is theirs. It's not like he's out there with a boombox over his head saying, please take me back. He also would be like, nah, I'm good, move on. Because it's he's the one, or he and his agent were the ones who helped construct this contract with a poison pill in it. So the Saints had to make a decision prior to free agency. So $100 million in bonuses don't vest 2 days after the league year. And that's just was never going to be something that happened. So I think that's honestly the biggest part of it is he's I am just as much done with the Saints as they are done with me. So don't make this out as them saying now we've had enough, because I think Mike has also had enough. And I think that's kind of where you're at. And that kind of ties into the free agency stuff, because we've gotten a conclusion, or at least as close to a conclusion as you can. Mike Thomas will not be on this roster next season. And it was always kind of what you expected, but now we can kind of go forward with that in mind and kind of make the numbers work with that in mind. But yeah, and he's tweeting about a lot of the stuff he's done in the city. And I agree with, he has been a great ambassador for the team in the city. It's just the last few years that have gotten a little wonky and a little uncomfortable. And I, for one, I'm going to miss Mike. I'm going to miss the player on the field, but I'm not going to miss a lot of this noise that's been created when he hasn't been on the field. Because that's what's been the most frustrating part, is when he's unable to play, yet we're still talking about him. And that's what happened in the second half of this season. That's what happened in several other seasons.
I just been amazed for a guy that doesn't like speaking in general. He sure likes going off on social media. You mentioned the bashing of Jeff Duncan. That continued to go on with other things, but bashing the team even. And then, like you said, it kind of wrapped up with this whole nostalgic, well, I did this for charity work with my time with the team and how good things were in the Superdome when things were rolling. And yeah, obviously 2019, things were at their peak. He was putting out pictures of them dancing on the sideline. We all remember, obviously, the Choppa style, Alvin Kamara dancing, Michael Thomas, Mark Ingram. But man, that was a long time ago, Mike, and we're dealing with the now when you haven't been available.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That was a whole lot more fun. That time period was a whole lot more fun than the last few years have been. Not wrong in any way. That was fun. This last couple of years has not been fun. So again, I don't disagree with it. But at the same time, you look at it and you say, like, yeah, Mike, yeah, like I get it. You're mad, but you're going to go into the free agent market and you're going to start to talk to teams, right? And if you think that, whether it's, I don't know, the Chiefs, the Ravens, whoever, that they're going to be like, yeah, cool. Definitely go off the deep end. Every time something doesn't go right, go off on a Twitter, firestorm about your quarterback. No team is gonna accept that behavior. So
I can't wait to get a guy that tweets out these cryptic messages that we have to decipher.
It's like, I just think he needs to have a bit of a reality check in terms of what's reasonable and what's not, and so, I don't know, maybe he's going to get to another team and it's going to be perfect and he's going to get exactly what he wants. He's going to go win a Super Bowl. I'm rooting for him. But I also kind of feel like this could go the way Antonio Brown to the Raiders went.
Oof.
Maybe he doesn't melt his feet off or whatever Antonio Brown did, because Antonio Brown is a special kind of lunatic. But, like you gotta, like, it's not as simple as just showing up and saying, I'm Mike Thomas, everyone get out of the way. So again, I'm rooting for him. I hope he lands somewhere. I hope he can go get himself a ring. But I'm not going to say that I'm going to miss the drama, because I won't.
No, definitely rooting for him, obviously, unless he ends up on someone like Atlanta. And I could see that happening, obviously.
We'll see. But yeah, we'll get into a lot. Two other things that happened this week, two other big things, or at least, one that happened last week, one that happened this week. Tyrann Mathieu, Demario Davis have both signed 2-year extensions. Both are entering the final year of their contract. Both took a little bit less money to free up some money against the 2024 cap, guarantee another year. Demario would be his age 36 season, because he's 35 right now. Tyrann, I think it would be his age 33 season that he is under contract through. And, we'll have a lot to say about this, but we did talk about this on Friday on Sports Talk, because Tyrann Mathieu, that deal kind of came through on Friday. The media talked to him, and I asked him a question about durability. And I think when you look at these two guys, one of the reasons that you feel okay about these contracts is they don't miss games. Period. Tyrann has not missed a game since he's been here. Demario's only missed one game in his 6-year Saints career, and it was due to COVID. So, and at the time, like, I'm gonna preface this by saying this was all Friday, so it's gonna be in the future tense. But rather than saying it all again, I do want to play it, for one thing, to toot my own horn, because I was spot on with what was all going on, and for two, because this all came out prior to this kind of erroneous Jason La Canfora article stating that the Saints were trying to trade Demario Davis. And maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe they had said, like, someone had said, what about Demario? And they were like, well, what would you give us? Right? That may have happened. I don't know. I can't say it hasn't. But the idea that they're attaching his name and trying to trade him never made sense. This all was before that. This was Friday. That all came out Saturday, Sunday. So let's just listen to that real quick. And then it starts off with a question to Tyrann Mathieu that kind of builds into the rest. Tyrann, the last 2 years, 17 games, 17 starts. How much pride do you take in just the durability, the availability that you've had? And as you've gotten later in your career, is that something that you've had to maybe spend more time on as your process changed over the last, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I struggled with a lot of injuries, early on in my career that, I kind of felt robbed me, a plan, per se. I think I missed close to 17 games, I think my first 5 years in the league, right? So, and I think that kind of played a part in, me getting released from Arizona, right? And I think as a youngster, you don't really realize your availability, right? Like it's all about your ability, right? And I think as you get older, you become more conscious of your availability, right? Because your ability is not what it used to be, right? So, just being able to show up every day, right? Every game, every practice. I think that's what it's all about. Like that's what we get paid to do, right? And so I enjoy doing it. For me, it's not work, and then too, for my teammates and coaches, man, like I always want to be one of those guys that they know is going to be there, that they know that they can count on. So I take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah, and so to me, that's important, right? When you're talking about, okay, you got a 32-year-old guy. He'll be 32 at the start of next season. So you're extending Tyrann Mathieu through his age 33 season, which is not for nothing. It is weird. I'm officially at the point where the old guys in the NFL are younger than me, and I'm not sure exactly how to handle it, but I'm trying. Right, I'm trying. And, Tyrann's interesting because you look at the last 2 seasons, has not missed a game. Right. In 2022, a year that there was a lot of criticism levied his way. He had a career high in tackles. He had 91 tackles. He had 3 interceptions. This year he had 75 tackles, 4 interceptions. He makes plays. So you feel good about it, even though, I hear people, he's 30. You don't want to invest too much in that. But at the same time, I don't really care what his age is. I say, is he productive? And the answer is yes. And why do I bring that up? Well, the Saints, they still have about $10 million to clear against the cap. One of the contracts they have not touched yet is Demario Davis, a guy who's older. He's 35 now. I think you're going to look at his contract and you're going to say, should we do the same thing? Should we extend him? He's in the final year of his deal, and maybe do we extend him and try to give him a 2-year contract and see if you can structure it somewhat like you did the Tyrann Mathieu deal, and maybe even save a little bit more than the $8 million that's the simple restructure could be. And so you ask, okay, but should we? Because you're talking about extending a guy through what would be his age 36 season,
right?
If you give him the 2-year deal. Well, why would you do that? Well, just look at what Demario Davis has done over the last 2 years. You talk about durability with Tyrann Mathieu. You talk about the work he puts in and the amount that he thinks about it, that he plans for it, that he spends time on it so that when game day shows up, he's ready. Demario Davis, 17 games, 17 starts this past season. The year before that, 17 games, 17 starts. He has missed 1 game in his entire 6-year Saints career, and that was due to COVID. This past season, he had an injury that he would tell you the doctors gave him a 0% chance to play. I don't know if that's that. I'm not going to verify that, because it seems like if you got a 0% chance, they wouldn't even let you try. But hey, that's what he says. So, and it was a significant injury. He did play through it. That was in the Jags game. He had a knee brace on. Right. He was limited, but he did play. So he started all 17 games. The last 2 years, he has had his 2 highest totals of solo tackles. In 2022, it was 56. This past year, it was 47. Those are the 2 highest totals of his career in his age 33 and age 34 seasons. The last 2 seasons, he has set career highs in sacks. He's had 6.5 sacks each of the last 2 seasons. Those are both career highs. So all the evidence to me, points to the fact that this man is either a superhuman or a cyborg. So I don't care how old he is. I look and say, is he still productive? And the answer is yes. So I don't necessarily look at that and say, well, we're worried that he's going to start breaking down. And I say, yeah, pay the man as long as he wants to play, because he's only getting better. It seems that way. So I think that's what you're going to see. You saw that they dealt with Tyrann Mathieu's contract earlier this week. They have until Wednesday to get cap compliant. There's a few levers they could pull to get there. I expect Demario Davis is going to be the next one that you hear.
All right. Yeah. And so for one thing, I just didn't feel like saying all that again, because I felt like I said it once. Why do it again? For the other, this was last Friday. So if anyone's wondering, yeah, I was right. Anyway. And you get into it, and that's where you are, right? And I think that it always made sense for those 2 guys to either restructure or extend them an extra year. And once you did it with Tyrann, a guy who is very similar, right? Like, he's an emotional leader. He's a veteran that people look up to. just made a lot of sense to extend him. And then you look at Demario, when you could have saved $8 million with a simple restructure. With the new deal, you're saving a little over $9 million. You had a little over $10 million that you had to clear relative to the cap. So that puts you one move shy. The Saints have to be cap compliant by Wednesday at some time. I don't know the exact time, but I'm sure that will be the case well before Wednesday, because they have about a dozen routes they could take to clear that remaining $1 million. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a guy like Jawan Johnson, but like, again, there's with $1 million to clear, you could say like, okay, they could restructure JT Gray and clear $1 million. They could restructure Colin Saunders and clear $1 million. They could restructure Foster Moreau and clear $1 million. So like we can talk about how they got there, and they will have got there without touching the deals for Ryan Ramczyk, Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, which were 3 deals that were probably the last 3 on my list that I wanted to deal with if I didn't have to. For various reasons. Ryan because of the knee, Taysom because he's he's mid-30s and he plays a very high violence position, right? He takes a lot of hits. And then Alvin because he's a 29-year-old running back, and we've seen running backs typically, there's a cliff waiting at some point in that 29, 30, 31 area. And if I can get into next season with a little more flexibility, I'd love to do that in terms of his contract. So this always made sense. I'm glad to see it. You were never going to move on from Demario or Tyrann this year. And I think what makes you feel comfortable is the durability of those guys. And that's why I wanted to talk to Tyrann about it. And I thought his answer was actually pretty well said in terms of, I think he said, like, when you're young, you think about your ability because your availability isn't a question. But then as you get older, your availability becomes way more important as your ability starts to wane a little bit as you get older. And I think both of those guys are a perfect example of they put so much pride into taking care of their bodies that it's the reason that you're okay with giving them an extension at this age.
Yeah, and I put them, obviously, Demario, Tyrann, and you throw Cam Jordan in that mix too, and boom, you got that kind of situation on all 3 levels of that defense.
Yeah, the only difference with Cam is while the availability has still been there, the difference is Tyrann and Demario are putting, like, both guys have set career highs in the last 2 seasons. Tyrann had a career high in tackles in 2022. Demario has had career high sack totals in each of the last 2 seasons. He had his most solo tackles in a year in 2022 with 56, and then the second most in 2023 with like 47. So, like, Cam, meanwhile, has set a low water mark for sacks outside of his rookie year, which you can look at injuries, you can look at whatever, but I understand why people were a little bit more concerned about that one, because you're still hopeful that he can get back to being, the like 8 sack guy. Like, I don't need a 15 sack guy, which would have been his high total. I think he had 15.5 in 2019. Like, but I do need to see 8 to 10, right? I need to see that guy because you are relying on him. And so that is interesting. But I do think that you're right in the sense that this team values veteran leadership on its roster for good reason. It's important. And they have one of those like clear veteran leaders at defensive line, at safety and the secondary, and at linebacker and Demario Davis. So I think that plays a big role in when you're making these decisions. Plus it fits into your cap management anyway. So it's a double. Yeah,
like you said, we can make excuses for Cam, but we know Demario was dealing with stuff, and man, he was still able to just put it out.
Yeah, that injury that he had no chance to play. It's his miracle. Crazy. Recovery. Yeah. But I don't know if you saw the Burke Kirchhoffer thing with Demario where she like documented his whole process. It was just like crazy. Like all the cupping, and there's different types of cupping, and whatever. He's got like a whole team of people that help him recover. And I don't think a lot of people necessarily appreciate how much work these guys do just to recover, just to make sure their bodies are ready to go. Because it's like, yeah, you play well on the field, but then you have like 3 days to get back before you have to practice again. And it's a process. Like, these guys invest in it, especially the older you get when you get into your 30s, because you're not playing if you don't spend that extra time getting better, getting your body back, as they'll probably call it. Yeah.
No, I agree with you totally when you said like Demario is basically a cyborg. I don't know how he's able to do it, week in and week out, obviously. You mentioned that 0% chance of being able to play, somehow is able to pull it off. And yeah, just key contributor, and yeah, all around with Tyrann. Everybody was quick to write him off year one in New Orleans, and we saw him, I guess, gradually get more acclimated to the defense and more comfortable with the scheme. That's why he was able. That was mainly the reason for his slow start when he did come to New Orleans.
Yeah, he'd tell you that himself, is that he was learning. It was a new system for him. He was learning, and he wasn't quite as comfortable in it as he is now, and he feels a lot better in it now. Tyrann, it's interesting too. We talk about the health and the durability. Like, that wasn't always the case. Like, he talked about, he missed, I think it was 15 games over his first 4 seasons, something like that, in Arizona, right? So he hasn't always been this durable, always available guy. So it's something that he's worked at, and it's working out for him. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate Demario, because Demario is, I think, the oldest player on the roster, and I think he's the only player on the roster that's older than me. I'm like the same age as Cam. It's weird. I think Cam is like 2 months older than me. I think he was technically an 89 baby. I'm a 90s baby. I turned 34 today. Cam's 34. But Demario's 35. So Demario still gives me hope. If I get my shit together, maybe I have a year left to play. No, that's, what am I talking about?
I would hope for that same bill of health that both of those guys have had, honestly.
Yeah. I can barely, I throw my back out every couple of months. I'm just like doing nothing, just like,
sleep wrong or something, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a certain age where you start injuring yourself while you're asleep, and it makes you. It's like you start looking at the bed, like, what happened? What was I doing in there? Like, I was just like, okay. Anyway, I have to sit on a pillow because my back hurts. Anyway, I do not have the same recovery as Demario Davis. That's a given.
We'll see if WWL, we get a cupping machine at the studio we could use.
I think I'd be afraid of it. Those things are intense.
Especially who's operating it.
Yeah, every time I see like the bruises from it, I'm just like, Jesus, what is happening?
Right.
It's like giant hickeys on your back. Yeah, I don't know. But all right, let's wrap up this segment. We're going to come back. We're going to play our interview with Scott Shanle, talk a little about what he had to say. We talk about Demario, Tyrann, Jordan Howden, guys like that. Let's talk about Clint Kubiak's offense, so we'll get into it. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Hit us up on Twitter at Jeff Nowak, at Steve Geller, WWL. The show is at Saints_pod, and we'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We're still talking free agency, guys getting re-signed, guys getting extensions, whatever, draft needs, all of that. We'll do a mock draft later in the week. I keep promising a mock draft, and I'm either out of the state or, sitting on a jury or whatever. We considered doing one today, but just like there's just so much to talk about that it just didn't seem to, like, it felt impertinent to do a mock draft on the first day of free agency. So
it was sad, like you couldn't even like kill some time while you were bored on jury duty, like doing a mock draft, because everything was taken away from you.
Didn't work out the way I had intended. But we'll get to that. Well, I promise we'll get you some incorrect mock draft picks here before too long, right? We don't want to keep you.
You were pretty good last year.
We don't want to leave you hanging. Well, I have been pretty spot on with my mock draft picks over the last several years. So I do feel like I need to continue that so I can figure out whether my hot streak is over or not. But we'll see. I was like one of the only people that had Foskey for whatever reason. So you might say, well, you're an idiot because that was a bad draft pick, and you might be right. So,
but they still made the pick.
Yeah, I was still right. I'm in the business of being right.
Exactly.
That's why I played to you a radio clip from last Friday, because I am pretentious. Anyway. So at this segment, we're going to get into another clip from last Friday, but it's not dated. Like, we talked about a lot of the stuff. We actually talked about Demario because, like I said, I was anticipating this extension. So I was able to ask Scott Shanle what he felt about Demario, whether they should extend Demario too. So we'll get into that. I appreciate Scott Shanle for coming on. He's always got great info. Obviously, former Saints linebacker, Super Bowl champion back in 2010. So without further ado, let's get into that.
Tyrann Mathieu getting an extension from the Saints, obviously a great thing for the team and the city, just all around. 31-year-old safety still producing at a high level.
Yeah, I thought it was a good signing. I think the thing that he brings to the team, yeah, he's still playing at a high level, to your point, but the leadership, the locker room accountability he brings to the defensive side of the football and to the team, I think a lot of guys in that locker room respect him. Coaches and players, fans love him. So I thought it was a great signing, great extension, and it'll be great for the team all around. Production and leadership.
We were talking earlier about durability and, both Tyrann and Demario Davis, right? Tyrann's going to be 32 before the start of next season. Demario's 35 going into next season. But these are both guys who have started all 17 games each of the last 2 seasons. Demario's only missed 1 game in his 6 seasons with the Saints, and it was a COVID miss. It was that Dolphins game that everybody missed. And so, you're a guy who played into your 30s, and I think just some good insight of how difficult is that, and how much more difficult does it get to maintain that high level and be available every week as you get later and later into your career?
Yeah, it is something truly special. I think Demario, it's a little bit different too. I think the way the league is run now, the way the practices are, the training camps, guys are able to maybe take a little bit better care of their bodies. If they're willing to invest the time and the money into their bodies, they can still be very productive players in their mid-30s at positions like linebacker. You didn't really see that before. So I think these guys, even though they're 34, 35 as a linebacker, maybe that's maybe 30 and 31 back when I played, just because of the wear and tear on their bodies is less throughout the year. Now, in season, they're playing an extra game. Those things all add up. But to your point, you go back to last season, and it seems like every time you want to look at Demario and say, he might be losing a step, but he's not the same player. And then he goes and he takes over a game. And I think that's the incredible thing. And the best point you made was his availability. And that's the number one ability you can have in the NFL, any professional sport. Being out there every single week or almost every week is really hard to do. And then on top of it, you're one of the most productive players on the team still. So, yeah, I think Demario, he's got a lot of good football in him. And, you never know when Father Time shows up, but it certainly has not showed up for Demario Davis. He's been outstanding, and he was last year again.
Scott, when you're looking at this team, what are some of the positional needs that you feel this team needs to address?
Yeah, you're always in the business of acquiring players and putting together as much talent as you can, whether that's free agency, you don't want to overspend, but you truly want to draft well. Everybody knows that's how you build championship teams is through the draft. So you have to get back to accumulating some picks. But in free agency, the Saints have always kind of been a value shopper when it comes to free agency. You're trying to fill in the pieces of the puzzle you want or add competition to certain spots where maybe you have a starter that you think you can improve. So I think there's one thing is you probably need to look at the offensive line. The offensive line was a little bit of a concern last year. Wasn't consistent enough throughout the year. Defensive line, you can never have too many guys who can rush the passer. And then secondary. If you can couple defensively your secondary and your defensive line, you can do a lot of great things on defense. And it's going to be interesting this offseason. Do the Saints move on from players, the Marshall Lattimore rumors, the Kamara rumors? Do you accumulate picks with guys like that and move on from guys like that? Or do you still think they have some good football left in them?
Yeah, you mentioned the secondary there, and I think it's a good question. And so obviously Marshawn, but Marcus May, it's reported they're going to move on from him this season. So I guess you look at a guy like Jordan Howden or the field, right? There's a lot of safeties in the free agent market right now, and then you have a draft where the Saints have been pretty productive in terms of finding quality safeties in the mid rounds, right? Marcus Williams was a 3rd rounder, even Howden was a 5th rounder. So I'm curious, you look at Jordan, you look at what he was able to do in year 1, and is he a guy that you look at and say, hey, this is someone we think can step in and be that starter? Or is there still some development there and maybe you do have to go find a veteran on the free agent market that you maybe trust a bit more with a team that feels like it's ready to win now?
Jordan's play last year, honestly, is a big reason why Marcus May is no longer going to be with the Saints. I think Jordan did enough good things that the Saints said, hey, let's give this kid a chance. And you know what? If you don't ever really look at him after 1 year, unless they're just a truly spectacular season and say, oh, we can lock into him for 5 years. What I think what Jordan did is I think he told the Saints organization, I'm good enough to be a starter, but the Saints organization, just like the point I made before, they're going to look at a value free agency veteran player. Who can push Jordan? Where can that competition come from and get the best out of Jordan? Or maybe this free agency signing comes in and pushes him, but he ends up starting. So you can never have enough quality players in the back, and especially the way Dennis runs the defense. He'll put you down in the box. If they can, he'll blitz him. He'll put him in as a nickel linebacker. So you can have enough good, versatile safety, Swiss Army knife type players in this defense that Dennis runs. And it's going to be interesting. Free agency is going to be interesting. You look at the Buffalo Bills, they released almost their entire secondary. So obviously they feel like there's a lot of depth in free agency that they can go after and sign players.
I mean, just to follow up, based on what you said there, it sounds like you feel like Jordan very well could win that job, right? Even if you bring in somebody, it's to push him more so than not being confident that he could be a starting safety.
No question. There's no question about it. I think when you saw Jordan last year come in and make some plays, and you really thought, wow, this kid's only a rookie. He's making some good plays. And that was, to my point, it wasn't a shot at Marcus. It was just Marcus May as a veteran player. If a young guy comes in and he's making plays and the organization can pay them less and they can potentially have a future star in their hands, they're going to go in that direction. I think that's why they're going to give Jordan Howden every opportunity to be a starter for them.
Scott, we talked obviously about the main guy in that linebacking core of Demario Davis. What have been impressions of a guy like Pete Werner? He's going into his fourth season this year. Was able to stay mostly healthy last season. Had struggled a bit in the past. But how have you seen his development with this team?
Yeah, Pete is in a very critical year, and he has to stay healthy, number one. And then he's got to be consistent this year. Like I said, this is a huge year for him. We've seen Pete make great plays, and then sometimes he'll miss some tackles. And I think last year was an inconsistent year for him. But if you go back to 2 years ago, the first half of the season, he was arguably the defensive MVP. He was an outstanding player. And I think for him, it's about taking care of his body, getting as strong as he can, avoiding those injuries, and putting together a great, consistent year. Because the one thing about Pete that I love about him and Demario together, it's really a two-linebacker league anymore because it's a nickel defense. It's a 4-2-5 base defense. So if you can have two linebackers who are truly four-down linebackers, can run, cover, and blitz, you have something special. I think the Saints definitely have that. So it's a huge year for Pete, and he is a four-down linebacker who can do it all, and he just needs to be more consistent in space.
Yeah, Scott, I can't remember if we've talked since the Saints put their entire offensive staff together, but obviously we knew about Clint Kubiak well in advance because they kind of settled on that prior to the Super Bowl. But a lot of interesting hires down the line. You know, the one that really stands out to me is John Benton, and whether he can maybe tease a little bit more development out of Trevor Penning that you just haven't seen. So I'm curious, are there any of these hires that stand out to you, and where do you see this staff kind of building? Because it's a pretty stark shift, and it's the biggest shift the Saints have really had on the offense since they hired Sean in 2006.
Yeah, absolutely. The Sean Payton way of doing offense, it's gone. It's out of the building. It's a completely fresh, new ideas, new scheme. Players are going to have different verbiage. Things are going to be called way different. There's going to be way different formations, motions. Players are going to be asked to do different things. So I think first thing as a player, you have to be open to new coaching, new ideas. And if you can do that, you can have growth in yourself as a player. So hopefully the guys in that locker room are willing to be open to new ideas and to do things new ways. So I'm excited about this offense because I know by going against it's the Shanahan tree offense. It's the McVay. It's a lot of misdirection. It's a lot of messing with the defense's eyes to get the running plays that you want, get explosive plays in the running game. It's about matchups, getting guys mismatched. Juwan Johnson should be a nice fit in this offense when you think about George Kittle with San Francisco. So when you start pairing together the players the Saints have with the type of offense this is, I think it can be a really good fit. That's why I said earlier, it comes down to the offensive line play. You can run any offense you want in the league if your offensive line play is stellar. And the Saints offensive line play last year was just too inconsistent to do anything, run game or pass game. So I think some of this scheme will help the offensive line because it's going to mess with the defensive eyes and keep them on their heels a little bit.
Yeah, I do think that point is interesting, and you can give some insight here. What does make all that motion, all that so difficult? Because obviously there's the element, okay, they can identify man versus zone, stuff like that. But I think when the Saints went against the Rams, they talked about why did Alontae Taylor get benched? It's because he got beat with his eyes. They ended up going to Ugo Amadi, and nothing really worked in that game. But what is it about all the motion, all the misdirection that is difficult for defenders, and how does it beat?
Yeah, it really comes down to it tests your discipline. It tests your defensive discipline as an individual player and as a team defense, because it is really hard to have 11 guys on a defense every single week that you're going to face that is going to be truly disciplined, that is going to know after you motion or you reload and you reset the tight end a different way. You do all those things because all you need is one guy to be out of his gap, one guy to be messed up on what he's doing, and you'll exploit it. That's the NFL. That's the nature of the beast. It's that fine of a line. So all those motions and shifts and things like that, you're hoping it confuses one guy, one or two guys, and you're going to get them. So I do like, when we faced John Gruden when he was in Tampa Bay, they did a lot of those things. And we had really disciplined defensive players, so it didn't really mess with us a whole lot. But if you can face some defenses and make them stress some things, they forget their basic fundamentals, and that's how you can gash them.
All right, thanks again to Scott Shanle for coming on. A lot of great info there. To me, one of the things, and that's why I followed up with him, one of the things that I thought stood out from him was, I think we've heard a lot about Jordan Howden, and there's some confidence in what he was able to do as a rookie, and this team clearly likes Jordan Howden. But I think Scott was pretty clear there that, I think his words were they're going to give him every possible chance to start. And I tend to agree. I think you're going to bring in bodies, whether you re-sign a guy, whether you re-sign a Jonathan Abram or you draft a guy in the mid rounds, right? I still think that Jordan should be the guy with the inside track and the guy to beat, right? He should be the guy to beat in that secondary for that second starting safety spot next to Tyrann Mathieu. And it's a lot of because the way he played and the way he developed as a rookie, and more so than just the ability on the field, the mentality, the approach that he has. Because I've spoken to him a bunch of times. It did not seem like I was talking to a rookie. It seemed like I was talking to a much more established player. And, it's similar to how I felt about Alante in his rookie season. So, yeah, I thought that what he had to say about Jordan was interesting, and I think he's on point there.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, too, with the safety market got a boost in free agency this year with all the names that were released and on it, but I don't know if the Saints are going to be major players for any of those guys. I'm more with you of maybe try to sign some of your own, look to the draft to add to the depth there. But some of those bigger names, I don't expect the Saints to target in free agency.
Yeah, it is interesting because, and I think Tyrann Mathieu talked about this in his interview, it's some teams value safety more than others. It's pretty clear. Some teams see it as a position where you should spend a significant amount of money. Some teams don't. The Saints over the last several years have been really interesting because while they typically don't look like they don't sign guys to that big time second contract, they will sign veterans to reasonably big contracts. They signed Malcolm Jenkins to a decent sized deal. They signed Marcus May to a decent sized deal. They signed Tyrann Mathieu to a decent sized deal, and then decent sized deal, and then extended him. So they clearly are willing to spend money at the position. They're not just saying we're going to go get rookies and slot them in. But I do think they have an upper ceiling to what they are willing to pay, and that ceiling is somewhere in the 3-year, $30-some-odd million range, right? Because that's about what you signed Marcus May for. It's about what you signed Tyrann Mathieu for. It's about what you signed Malcolm Jenkins for. But they are not going to pay someone in the 3-year, 4-year, $60 million range like Marcus Williams got or Malcolm Jenkins got when he left, Kenny Vaccaro got when he left. The only one that I still think doesn't make a ton of sense is Von Bell because he got out of town for what's well within their range. But I do think that it's a trend. It's not just cap casualties. It's a clear trend of they don't want to pay safeties on that second contract. That said, will they go after a guy like a Justin Simmons in free agency? I don't know. I think we'll talk about that more in the final segment, but I do think that it's just not a position that they feel like they need to pay at the top of the market to get quality safety play. And I think that's becoming more and more popular around the NFL. It's basically the running back of the defense at this point, right? If you've got a kid, you play cornerback or be a quarterback. Do not. How dare you say you want to be a running back? How dare you say you want to be a safety? Because they just don't.
Wide receiver money's creeping up there at least now. So
right, yeah, do not be a cornerback or a wide receiver. Do not be a safety or a running back.
Right.
Because that's where the money is. And so I don't know. Maybe that'll change. Maybe it goes in waves, right? Some teams, man-to-man schemes become super popular and they take the NFL by storm, and suddenly you're looking at it and saying, yeah, this is where all the money is. Now it's not that. But one thing I did want to talk about that Scott also talked about is the Clint Kubiak offense, which is effectively the Gary Kubiak, the Kyle Shanahan, the Mike Shanahan offense. And specifically what I thought was interesting was, a lot of the motion and a lot of the pre-snap read type stuff, the stuff that's meant to kind of catch the defense out of position, confuse them a little bit. And I thought the way he framed it was interesting. And I hadn't really heard anyone talk about it that way before. And it's that, when you're doing all this motion, right? A lot of it's eye candy. A lot of it's not actually affecting the play beyond, okay, we can tell whether they're in man or zone. We can do this, we can do that. But what he said that I thought was really, really important is you're not trying to fool all 11 members of the defense. All you got to get is one, right? All you got to get is one. And I'll point back to that Rams game where you benched Alontae Taylor, and it's like he was the one way too much of the time. And you kind of look at it almost as the inverse of the offensive line. We were talking about this before we came on. If you're an offensive line, the reason that all 5 offensive linemen are important as a unit is because, the right tackle, the right guard, the center can make the best blocks of their lives. If the left tackle gets beat clean, play's dead, right? Your quarterback's on his back, fumble, who knows what happens, right? Like all 5 guys have to do their assignment. They don't necessarily have to win, but they have to complete their assignment at a satisfactory level, right? A B block still works if the quarterback gets the ball out, right? But an F block will never work. And it doesn't matter. You can have A blocks at every other position. If you got an F at another position, you lose, right? It's the same thing in the secondary. You could have both cornerbacks playing the best coverage of their lives. The 2 safeties doing their jobs to perfection. Your slot corner gets screwed up on a motion and gets out of position, and there's a wide open wide receiver and he runs for 30 yards. A majority of your defense did a good job. One guy got beat, and the play is a loss for the defense. And I think that when you look at it that way, it makes a lot more sense. Like you're not just trying to confuse everybody. Like your goal is to get one guy one step out of position, then you can take advantage of him, right? And it's a lot harder to be perfect every time when you're playing a new position, when you're a young player. And that's why you look at Alontae Taylor versus the Rams and the struggles that he had in that game. And it makes, and I think that kind of helps to kind of crystallize it a little bit more when you're talking about what is the actual goal here? What are you trying to accomplish with all of this motion, all of these moving parts? And I think that's it.
Yeah, Alontae at least seemed to have learned the valuable lesson after getting benched, responded the right way. So that's
but then he got benched again.
Right, that did happen, right?
So I don't know. I mean, is it that, or did the Bucks just not do the things that we're making things difficult on him? Did you see? We're going to talk more about Baker, but did you see when Baker Mayfield got signed? Alontae Taylor said, "Yay, my favorite quarterback."
Yeah, I was like,
he
okay.
got his first ever interception off of Baker Mayfield in that Week 17 game.
Yeah, getting a little too overconfident there. Pipe the brakes a little, Alontae.
I don't know. I think this team needs that. I think this team needs character, right? That's one of the issues that I had with this team, and this is the last thing I'll say, and we can go to break. I talked about it with Jeff, another Jeff in jury duty, and he's a big Saints fan. And one thing I like that talk to like people I don't know that are big Saints fans, I'm usually like, how do you feel about the team? Because like I get a lot of feedback on Twitter and social media, whatever, from people who are always talking to me and always angry. And I don't think that's necessarily a good distillation of the fan base at large. So I try to just ask people like open-ended questions of like, how do you feel? What is your general opinion about this team? And a lot of the answers I get, they're not as karate chop, I hate everything as a lot of people on Twitter would make you believe. But it's like, there's this point where it's like, you can be boring and good. You can even be bad and interesting and fun. Like those 7 and 9 teams with Drew Brees, they weren't good, but they were interesting. You threw for a ton of yards. Like there was always something happening. Even the result was 7 and 9, but there were always interesting things happening. The failure of these seasons is because you are what you just cannot be if your goal is to energize a fan base and get people on your side. And that is mediocre and boring. Because that's what these last 2 years have been. They have been mediocre, 7 and 10, 9 and 8. But also the greatest sin is to just be boring. And that's what it is. It is boring at all levels. Now, if you're 13 and 4 and boring, everyone's going to be like, yeah, okay, fine. You can't be 8 and 9, 9 and 8 and boring, because that just drives people off a cliff. And I think that's kind of where he's at. And that's where I think a lot of fans are at. And so I think it's on this team to not be boring. And that's why when I say Alontae Taylor, I don't mind it, because that's the type of character excitement that I think you need. You need that kind of chip on your shoulder energy. And Alontae is one of those guys that I think can provide that.
Yeah, at least for me, the defense had some spice to it with the amount of takeaways they were getting. But man, oh man, the offense definitely was a bore, and hopefully Clint Kubiak can put that excitement back into the offense for me, because things have definitely been stale there the past couple years.
Yeah, no, and I think that's like when you're talking about what do you miss about Mike Thomas?
Right.
I don't miss the Twitter antics. I don't miss that. But I do miss the other stuff he was tweeting about. I missed the cell phone. Remember the cell phone? Remember back when the Saints were fun? When he was pulling a cell phone out of the goalpost, right? Like when they were jumping into the stands, celebrating with fans. That's the stuff I miss. I don't miss anything about the last 3-4 years from Mike. I don't.
Right. The Superdome playing old school New Orleans rap, people dancing on the sideline.
Yes. That's what I miss. And I got to find a way to get back to that. And however you do it, you got to find a way to get this team on the same wavelength as the city, and vice versa. And so if that takes Alontae Taylor starting Twitter beefs with Baker Mayfield, I'm all for it. Go
for it. I'm just hoping somewhere in there we get Alvin Kamara going back to being in the Matrix and seeing some impressive running.
That's true. That would be nice. But all right, let's end that segment. We're going to come back. We're going to talk more about free agency, what has happened, what we expect to see, what positions we think the Saints are going to target. We've already talked about this a little bit, but that was like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. So, what has developed? What do we think has changed? How do we feel about it now? So we're going to get into that. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. We will be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. This is going to be our free agency segment. I don't want to get too much into stuff that will be dated by Wednesday. This is always difficult this time of year because it all happens so quickly, and we could talk about one guy and then, he's in Houston 12 minutes later, right? And that's foreshadowing. But, we're going to get into a good bit, and I want to talk about stuff that has happened. I don't want to talk a ton about stuff that will happen, but we can talk about what has happened. And one of the things that happened in the NFC South that is very notable that doesn't even have anything to do with the Saints technically is Baker Mayfield. We talked a bit about this. The Bucs re-signed Baker Mayfield on a contract. I think it's 3 years, $100 million, right? Very
hefty, right? 50 guaranteed?
Yes. And it's interesting in perspective on Derek Carr's contract, because one of the things that you heard all season long was like, the Saints paid all this for Derek Carr and he did this, and the Bucs paid pennies and got a reason, like basically the same performance out of Derek Carr. I'm sorry, out of Baker Mayfield. And people like, and I basically say, hey, there's some perspective here. Now both guys are making $30 million. So we can't have that conversation anymore, because clearly what Baker Mayfield did was valued at $30 million, because that's how much they're paying him. They're paying him a little over $30 million a season. And the numbers on the first 3 years are virtually identical to what Derek is making over the first 3 years of his contract. Obviously, Derek's numbers are weird now because they've already been restructured and whatnot. But, so like, we can't, that conversation doesn't make sense anymore, because these guys had about the same season, and like, talk to me all you want about the fact that the Bucs made the playoffs. The Bucs went 9-8. The Bucs went 1-1 against the Saints, right? These teams had basically the same year. At one point, the Bucs lost like 6 of 7 games. They did not have a perfect season. The only reason you look at Baker's season and say, well, what an amazing season, is because he did it on like a $1 million contract. If he does the same thing on a $30 million contract, then there's a difference there. And so now it's like, okay, who do you compare Derek Carr to now? Because I think that the market just told you that what Derek did was worth about $30 million. Because you look at the numbers, I think Baker had like slightly higher counting stats. So you're talking about yardage, touchdowns. He had more interceptions. But there's a kind of margin for error there, which is that Derek missed 6 quarters, give or take? Like, he missed a majority of the second half against the Vikings, a majority of the second half against the Packers, and I think the fourth quarter against the Lions. So the discrepancy in counting stats can be accounted for there, right? That's a rounding error, I guess you would say. completion percentage, Derek had a higher number. Like, so both teams went 9-8. They went 1-1 head to head. So
yeah.
I just think it's interesting because now you can't look at it and say, well, Derek is getting paid this crazy amount and Baker's getting paid peanuts, because now Baker's getting $30 million a year. And then the Falcons are looking at potentially paying Kirk Cousins. Who the hell knows how much they're going to pay him? It's not going to be cheap. I bet it's not going to be shy of $30 million a year. So I think we can stop talking about Derek's contract as if it's an unreasonable amount of money, because that's just what the market is. Maybe they overpaid to some extent, but not by as much as people were clamoring about last season, because apparently any quarterback that has those types of numbers is going to get in the range of $30 million.
Yeah, I don't think folks fully grasp the market that is the quarterback in the NFL anymore. And man, oh man, we're seeing more and more ridiculous contracts coming. I don't know, what to think for the future. I don't know if we talked about this on the show or last podcast, but you pay a top-notch quarterback and a wide receiver. Where's the rest of your cap space going to be nowadays?
Yeah, and I mean, like, Derek needs to be better. Like, that's a
Absolutely.
second conversation to be had. Like, Derek needs to be more consistent than he was last year. My point is that the contract is not unreasonable, right? And it's, if you want to sign basically any quarterback who has done anything in the NFL, you got to pay about $30+ million to get him to come to town. That's just the deal. That's the market, right? Now, if you want Joe Flacco for a season, yeah, you could get him. Right.
Right.
But there's a clear watermark that if you're above it, then that's what you're getting. And then, like, some teams turn around immediately and say, like, yeah, okay, Kenny Pickett, like, you want a rookie quarterback, right? Oh, we're going to go draft a rookie in the first round. 2 years later, you're bringing in Russ over Kenny Pickett. I'm so glad. Like, I've been hating on Kenny Pickett since day one. So I'm glad that it only took 2 years for me to be vindicated and to take that he's kind of trash. He's a backup. He's a career backup. But like Daniel Jones, like, look at the Giants we're also in the market for Russ, right? Who knows what they're going to do with Daniel Jones? Another guy they getting paid in the $30 million range. Geno Smith is in the $30 million range. So, I just think that it's not about the money at the quarterback position. It's about the production.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation we need to have. It doesn't need to be about the amount of money he's making, because again, you're going to be talking about that contract by the time it's up as in the bottom half of quarterback contracts.
I think the problem for Saints fans is they want to believe that Andy Dalton could have gave you the same production for the minimal cost of what you gave Carr, and you could have been rebuilding the quarterback position then instead of being invested in Carr. I don't know what the anger is over paying Derek, except for the fact that they didn't view him as that guy.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, like, okay, you can bring in a bridge and have a rookie quarterback learning, or you can do what the Saints did and try to go with a veteran. And there's arguments to be made. That said, it's like, who is this rookie? And like, it's like funny because, like, yeah, okay, that's what the Bucs tried to do,
right?
and Baker got them to 9-8 and earned himself a $30 million contract. So it's not that simple.
No, I remember we were saying, "Oh man, the Bucs are tanking for Caleb."
I think that was their point. That was their plan, but he played too well, right? So I don't know. I think it's interesting, but we don't have to talk about Baker all day, because I do want to talk about. So what else have the Saints done? So they had Avonte Maddox, former Eagles cornerback, in for a free agent visit. I don't know if he's having a workout. Nick Underhill reported that this morning, but it does make sense, right? We talked previously about how I don't want Alontae Taylor to be jammed back into the slot because you don't have any other options. I want to have maybe not a premium option, but a veteran option that I feel comfortable with. And Avonte Maddox is that guy. I think, I looked it up this morning. He's missed a good number of games over the last 2 seasons, right? I think it's something like 15 games over the last 2 seasons, which isn't exactly something you love to hear. But that said, you're going to evaluate that. You're going to have him in for a physical. You're going to see, like, just like we talked about with Marshawn Lattimore, how predictive are these injuries? Are they something you're concerned about long term? But what I do like to see in terms of this is, so Avonte Maddox has played 597 defensive snaps the last 2 seasons. 483 of those have been in the slot. So he is a dedicated slot corner. And I think whether it's him, whether it's somebody else, that's something that the Saints are prioritizing in this free agency cycle. And that's going to be even more important if you end up trading Marshawn Lattimore, which we're still kind of waiting to see whether that market develops, what you end up doing. But I think that's just an indicator that the Saints agree that slot corner is a need for them.
Yeah, that was one, we've been batting around, obviously, with the idea of Marshawn leaving. It's like, all right, then it would seem that Alontae Taylor moves into that outside role, and then you're left still searching for that slot corner. And even if there is no Lattimore trade, I just don't like Taylor lined up in that nickel role. He showed that it just wasn't comfortable for him.
I mean, I like the ability, right? Like, I like the fact that he now can do it. Does that make sense? Like, it's a positive that if you need him in the slot,
I got you right.
he can play there. So even if you bring in a guy you intend to start in the slot, what if he gets hurt week 4? Who's your second best option? It probably would be Alontae. And that's not to say that you want to be stuck there, but if you need it in a pinch, it can happen. And I think there's value there. That you wouldn't say that with Marshawn, right? Like, you would never say, like, just because he's never done it, right? Like, you would never say, like, oh, like CJ got hurt. Who's going in? It's going to be Bradley Roby. It's going to be whatever, right? Whereas if you end up in a pinch where now you're looking at, okay, well, you trade Marshawn, Alontae's your outside corner, you have Ike Adam, right? You probably re-sign Ike if you trade Marshawn. Now, your slot corner goes down. Whoever you bring in Avonte Maddox, he goes down, whatever. You can shift Alontae inside, at least in a pinch, and know he's there, and then plug in somebody behind. So it's just a question of what's the best value, what's the best bang for your buck at all three of those positions. And it doesn't hurt that a guy can play inside, outside. So as annoying as that might have been for Alontae this season, it's in the long run, I think it's going to help him, particularly as he goes into free agency and tries to get a big contract. That said, I agree. I'd like to see Alontae get, it's like, and in part because I just think that, well, he was serviceable in the slot for a good chunk of this season. Like in Green Bay, I thought he had one of his best games as a pro. It's just, I don't think that's where he's at his best. And so it's about getting him in his most effective position.
And I don't feel like he's happy there either. He's doing it for the team, but deep down, he's not happy being the slot guy.
No, and then someone had even floated on Twitter that, like, oh, maybe they'll try Alontae at safety after the news that Marcus May got is going to get released.
He squashed that.
Yeah, and he said, nah. Like, that's just what he said. Like, nah. Which, yeah, I agree. He's not a safety. But either way, so Avonte Maddox is the only player as of now, as of 1:00 on Monday, that we know about visiting the Saints. By the time you listen to this podcast, that could have changed. So don't take that for anything. It's just the nature of this time of year. Stuff develops quickly. The other thing that happened, that just happened, Lonnie Johnson Jr. is headed to Houston, back to Houston even. He was there before. So that's, as we talk about, okay, what do you do at safety? His name is now out of the running there. So you're looking at guys like Ugo Amadi, Jonathan Abram, player A from free agency or player B from draft, right?
Yeah, you just mentioned that. And very interestingly enough, I just saw a pop up on social media that the Panthers are planning to move on from Von Bell. So maybe a reunion eventually with someone like him, depending on that relationship with DA, obviously.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's going to be a lot of options. It's going to be interesting to see how they do it. But yeah, I think the Saints over the last several years have made it pretty clear that guys returning to the fold is something that they're okay with, right? There's clearly a no hard feelings situation when they go out of town. Malcolm Jenkins, for example. But they're willing to bring guys back. They have no issue bringing guys back.
Sean Payton admitted, I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that he had in his tenure here, was letting Malcolm out the building.
Yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, so that's obviously something that's there's potential there if the Saints go. The issue with Von is he's a little long in the tooth relative to what you be asking him to do. Now I just don't know. He's never played with Tyrann Mathieu before, so it's tough to say like, oh, this will work. You already have one older guy. How many of those guys do you want? But yeah, there's definitely something out there. And especially if the market doesn't develop for Vaughn the way it probably won't, and you can get him on a sweetheart contract just to come back home and force a bunch of fumbles. That was what he always did really well, was force fumbles.
And with Mike T leaving, that leaves another Ohio State vacancy that we have to fill. So
that's true. Oh, and potentially Marshawn. So
that's true, right? There you go.
It would be weird if they just only had like one Ohio State guy, because they used to have like Nick Vannett and all these guys. Now it's just Chris Olave, which just feels wrong.
Yeah, got to boost up the Buckeye presence.
Yes. Oh, and Pete Werner. I'm sorry, Pete Werner. Can't forget about Pete. Yeah. But all right. From there, we don't have a ton to talk about. But I do want to bring up. So the Saints always tend to be the second wave team in free agency. You don't see them typically make a ton of moves. They did sign a fullback, Xander Horvath. You joked that he sounds like a Marvel character. I think he's more of a DC. It just sounds, Xander. Just it's a very, very DC sound. I did just watch the new Aquaman. It was terrible. So take that for what it is.
Have you seen the Marvels movie? Is it worse than that?
The Aquaman?
Was Aquaman worse than the Marvels?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because it was the last one. It was like they all had senioritis, right? Like it's the last DC movie of that arc of that universe, right? So they just let Jason Momoa do whatever the hell he wanted to do.
Gotcha.
Because Jason Momoa is a weird dude. Like, I think people didn't have proper perspective because he was in Game of Thrones, and they were just like, okay, Jason Momoa is cool. He's just this big tough guy. But then it's like now he's in like the Fast and Furious and Aquaman, and it's just like, this guy's a weirdo. But in a good way, in a fun way. But it's like hard to take him seriously when they
great. Now you're gonna have Jason Momoa after you, bro.
They just let him off the chain in the way they did. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. Xander Horvath, fullback. The Saints have signed him. Now, there are several players that the Saints have not re-signed. They did tender Rashid Shaheed, so he will be back. That was always obvious that was going to happen because, I mean, an exclusive rights free agent, for them to get out of the building, you got to hate them. Because all you have to do is extend them a minimum contract, like $990,000 or something like that, and you can keep them. That's how it works. And it's like fewer than 3 accrued seasons, and you just got to tender them a qualifying offer. And of course they did. Adam Prentice is also a restricted free agent. Saints did not tender him. And Lynn Bowden is a restricted free agent. Saints didn't tender him. I could see Lynn getting brought back as a free agent. It just didn't make sense because the tender price was way higher than you would have paid him. It was way higher anyway. But you kind of go down the list, and there's a handful of players that I think you would want to bring back. I think you want to bring back Ike Yadam. I think you want to bring back Zach Bond. I think you want to bring back Andres Pete. But I think how the Saints approach free agency, especially with their own players, is they're going to say, hey, this is what we have for you. This is the offer that we're going to give. We think it's fair. We think this is what the market would dictate for you. And you can either take it or you can go see what's out there in free agency.
Right. Go check it out. Right.
And if you find a great contract and you want to go there, go ahead. No hard feelings. But this offer's here. So let's see. And I think like a guy like Caden Ellis last year, he went out and he was like, oh, the Falcons are going to pay me a good chunk of change. I'm going to take that. And the Saints were like, okay, good for you. Happy for you. David Onyemata, same thing. Marcus Davenport, same thing.
Well, now Onyemata and Ellis are going, wait a minute, where'd Nielsen go?
Right. The grass is not always greener. But that's how the Saints operate. They have a number and a ceiling, and they say, this is what we can pay you. Take it or leave it, and we're not going to be offended if you go get another deal. But they're also not going to be the team. So, like, for example, what would it take for it to happen prior to free agency? What would it take for it to happen today, even when free agency just gets started? The Saints would have to offer a contract that is at a price point that makes it so that players it's not even worth testing free agency because no one's going to match this or no one's going to blow this out of the water. And the Saints just aren't going to do that. It's part of the way they manage the cap. They have to be rigid. So I think that's, and it makes it so you have a much more reasonable bargaining structure than teams that are just like, we got to keep this guy around. It doesn't matter what the cost is. So I think that's why they end up being that second wave team, because for that to happen, Zach Bond, right, would have to let his agent go talk to teams and say, what are you going to offer? What are you going to offer? What are you going to offer? And so, that's when you kind of get that process sorted out. So, and that's true of free agents as well. That's what happened with Jamal Williams last year. It's what happened with Colin Saunders. They said, hey, here's the offer. Feel free to go shop around. We'll be here if you want to talk some more.
No, we've seen them be a first day active on the first day, and with getting a guy like Jarris Bird didn't work out so well.
No, I think I think the approach they take is actually the more prudent one. And
Absolutely.
People will say it's because it has to be that way because of the way they manage the cap. And it's not wrong. They do have to be that way because they manage the cap, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong approach.
Right.
I actually think it's the right approach, and it's just a helpful byproduct of not having a ton of flexibility.
Right. You're not going to overspend on what somebody's done previously. Obviously, and that's what that first wave of free agency is to me. You're paying for what they did in the past, not what they're going to do for you.
Yeah, and I've always felt like, overspending to keep your own guys is one thing.
Right.
Because I just think there's value in that. There's value in continuity. There's value in guys who know the system and know the coaches and you feel comfortable with and bringing them back. Overspending to bring in a free agent because you feel like what happened outside of your building is way better than what happened inside of your building, that's usually a sign that you didn't do the job well in the first place in bringing in talented players and retaining talented players. And then a sign that's like, this guy, like, who knows if he's going to do the work? Like, a lot of times it's like, oh, this contract year, he played really well. Well, what happens when he gets that contract? You don't know. It's a variable you don't know. So, like, in a lot of instances, you see these big time free agent deals and they are not good. They do not work the way that you may have intended. So I've never had an issue with a team, filling needs in free agency when you need to, but otherwise building through the draft and retaining and developing and retaining your own players. And so, like, if the options are, hey, we can go get a big name guy, restructure everybody, go get a big name guy, and then have a much harder time extending Paulson Adebo, extending Pete Werner, extending Chris Olave in a couple of years, then I'm going to go with the retain your own talented players angle every time.
Yeah, and that, like you mentioned, the bargain bin shopping is definitely more prudent for this squad. Salary cap issues are not.
Yeah. So what do they bring in? I think they do bring in a slot corner option. So I think whether it's Avonte Maddox, maybe they get scared off by the medicals on him. I think that's going to be a big part of it because he has missed those years or a lot of games the last 2 years. I think you're going to bring in a slot corner. I think you're going to bring in a veteran safety. And depending on what you do with your own free agents, right? If you don't re-sign Zach Bond, then I expect you to maybe look at a linebacker. If you don't re-sign Andres Pete, then I expect you to look at a veteran offensive line option. But I would prefer you to re-sign those guys if you can, personally.
You mentioned safety too. I'm curious to see what happens with Jonathan Abram. I think he could be a good rotational guy for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think you could definitely bring back. Like, I think you're going to sign a veteran. It could be Jonathan Abram.
Right.
But last year you brought in several. Like, you brought in Abram and Lonnie Johnson, so it might not just be one because you're also down Marcus May, right? So you could end up bringing in 2-3 safeties and letting him compete for a roster spot. But that's going to be down the road. Like, those aren't signings that you're going to make the first week of free agency when everyone's overvaluing themselves, right? You're going to let the market develop for some guys. And then if there's a player that you really like that you think you can bring in at a reasonable contract, you go do it. I know this is the part of the podcast that everyone gets excited about because we're talking about fiscal responsibility.
That and the fact that it's crazy to me how much of a priority I think Andres Pete now is for this team.
Well, I mean, he's a priority if there's no other options that you're excited about, right? Like, I wouldn't, if they let Andres Pete go because he's getting offered a contract that they don't think is probably worth it, I'm okay with that as long as there's another option that you're looking at. Last year, for example, it's like you brought in Trey Turner, and that felt like a really good signing until he blew out his quad
immediately.
Second practice, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see. Because Andres is not exactly an injury risk free guy.
Right. No, you mentioned Turner there. I haven't heard anything about a potential future for him or where he's at in his injury.
No, I mean, he's one of those guys that I think if you're going to re-sign him, you're going to do it like a week before camp.
Yeah.
like you did last year.
Yeah.
But there's a whole mess. I put up a post on WWL.com that has all of the free agents, the potential free agents, the guys that are going out, the restricted guys, the guys who have been tendered already, and guys who have been in for a visit. We're going to update that as it goes. So if you're listening and you want to get kind of a good rundown of all the players that are going to be free agents that the Saints could potentially bring back, go check that out. Again, I'll be updating it throughout the day, throughout the week, to kind of have a good handle on everything. So go check that out. Feel free to bookmark it if that's your cup of tea. But otherwise, yeah, we're gonna be watching. We're gonna be seeing how this all develops, and I think after free agency, the mock drafts will get a lot more accurate.
Right. You have the different websites, though. Even now, you go to them and do the simulators. I'm still flabbergasted on the amount of those mock draft simulators that have Jaden Daniels falling so much, and I get mad and I redo them. Especially
now, because Mac Jones got traded to the Jaguars for like, a bag of used underwear. Like, I mean, Mac Jones and Jerry Jeudy, I think these are both like number 15 overall picks in back-to-back drafts. Both got traded. The highest pick that changed hands was like a 5th rounder.
Brutal.
Sometimes we overreact with draft grades, I think.
No, and Sean Payton doing Sean Payton things in Denver. I was like, I don't give a damn. I got rid of Russ and Jerry Jeudy later, like you said, for a used underwear. Basically,
that roster is unrecognizable from the one he took over.
Yeah.
But all right, let's wrap up this podcast. Thanks everyone who listened all the way to the end. I appreciate you as always. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Give us a rating. Give us a review. Let us know what you think. We're going to be trying to come back later in the week with more free agency updates, obviously. Hopefully a mock draft, kind of get you an idea of who we think the Saints are going to draft. That's a ways out still, but it's going to be one of the only intriguing things left to talk about when the Saints don't sign a single warm body in free agency.
One last message. Kirk Cousins to the Falcons.
Is that official?
From Shefty, so pretty much, yeah.
Woo, doggy. So the NFC South quarterbacks are going to be a bunch of old guys again and a rookie first overall pick. It's going to be the same thing as when it was Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Cam Newton, and Jameis Winston as the number 1 overall pick in 2016, right? I'm not comparing Derek Carr to, don't take me as comparing Derek Carr to Drew Brees. I'm just saying, like,
Jeff said that Derek Carr is Drew Brees.
In the sense of 3 old guys and 1, young number 1 overall pick is my point.
Well, Kirk,
it feels right. It feels right.
Hopefully we play Kirk Cousins in a primetime game because I know he's terrible in those.
So is Derek. So
ouch.
Actually, I take it back. I mean, we really haven't seen Derek play in any primetime games because the Saints don't get any. I don't count Thursdays.
Right. We'll see if he can turn into Mr. Sunday or Monday night for us.
Derek Carr ever plays actually, the only game he played Monday Night Football, they won because it was against the Panthers.
There you go. Right.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, yeah, we'll have plenty of time to talk about the state of the NFC South quarterbacking in future episodes. But again, thanks everyone for listening. Who dat? Go Saints.
Peace.
There you go. Be easy, y'all. Peace.